Hey guys, how's it going? Zach here. Today we're going to take a look at 5 of my personal favorite Linux distributions for the year of 2022. Alright, let's begin. So, up first, this is one of my favorites. This is Arch Linux. Today we're going to take a look at Arch Linux with the Qtile window manager. I have a slight configuration going on here. It's more or less vanilla, but here we are in Arch Linux. Let's go ahead and get a quick X render so we can have the proper screen resolution. Alright, so Arch Linux is pretty simple. It's very light, very minimal. In other words, when you install it, you don't even have a desktop environment. There's no Xorg. There isn't much to work with. Everything that you see here, I had to install myself manually. But either way, a lot of users actually prefer this as there's not a lot of bloat installed on the system. Today I'm going to show you the Qtile desktop environment. This is using the Monad Tall, or master and stack layout as some might call it. As you can see with a tiling window manager, no screen real estate is wasted. Everything is filling up the screen. If I open up another program, the real estate gets split 50-50. If I open up another terminal, you can see that it stacks up on the right side and you have your master on the left. When it comes to tiling window managers, everything is more or less keyboard centric. So you can see I'm using the Vim key bindings here to go in between these. Mod Enter opens up a terminal. Mod W will close a terminal. Close that window, close that window, close that window, and so forth. Let's say we wanted to do an update. When it comes to Arch Linux, you use the Pacman package manager. Pacman is very nice. It's one of my favorites personally. I run Pacman and Arch Linux on my primary machine that we are using right now. Let's go ahead and demonstrate a couple of Pacman commands. If you'd like to install a piece of software, pacman-s, and we can specify the name of the software. Let's go ahead and install, I don't know, Thunar file manager, as I don't have one on this system. There you go. So now we can go ahead and go over here to another workspace. Let's mod R for the run prompt. Let's type in Thunar, and there you go. This is my new file manager. Very nice. Anyway, this is a brief look at Arch Linux. As you can see, it is a very minimal operating system. There is nothing installed unless you want it. So let's go ahead and open up a terminal and shut down now. Let's close Arch Linux. So that was number 1 on my list. Number 2 on my list is probably going to be Fedora. Fedora Linux has a special place in my heart. I ran Fedora for a very long time. This is one of my favorite operating systems there is. It's an RPM based distribution, so we are going to be using DNF instead of Pacman that you saw in Arch Linux. So this is Fedora Linux. Fedora, you can see here, is using the GNOME desktop environment. Let's go ahead and show you in GNOME just exactly what we're dealing with here. So this is Fedora Linux. You can tell that we have 3 gigs of RAM on this VM. Has 2 cores set aside for it. We're using the Wayland windowing server. So there's Xorg and Wayland when it comes to Linux. Wayland will one day completely replace Xorg, but Xorg is still around because it currently works a lot better. I'm honestly surprised that Wayland is working this well for us right now within a virtual machine. But anyway, let's go ahead and open up a terminal, and let's go ahead and zoom in so you can see the text. So In Arch Linux, we had Pacman. Here, however, we have DNF. DNF is the package manager that you will use in all of these, not all of them, but the majority of these Red Hat based distributions are either going to use Yum or DNF. Yum's pretty much no longer supported, so DNF is going to be your go-to. DNF functions in much the same way as Pacman. For example, let's go ahead and install something. So it's sudo DNF install. Or let's go ahead and install Ranger. That is a terminal-based file explorer. It should be a small program. And there it is. It shows up in the local repositories. And there you go. Now we have Ranger. I checked it out in one of my other videos. This is a terminal-based file explorer that utilizes the Vim key bindings. Anyway, very cool. So when it comes down to Fedora DNF, we can do a lot. So we can go ahead and pull up that last command. Let's do an update. DNF, in my opinion, is a lot easier to run than Aptitude, which you might find with Ubuntu or Debian, or APT. I'm not sure if Aptitude is actually a separate program. Call me out on that if you watch this. Anyway, this would be your... This is Fedora Linux with the GNOME desktop environment. I have the Software Center set up here. However, out of the box, the Software Center will only install Flatpaks, so that is something to keep your mind on. Anyway, you can see that the Fedora Linux desktop environment actually does come pre-installed with a lot of stuff. I haven't installed much besides HTOP and Ranger. You can see it comes with a Fedora Media Writer. This is a very helpful program, and I have used it many a times to create installation disks, etc. A lot of these are just standard GNOME applications, but we do have LibreOffice here. We have GNOME Photos, GNOME Settings, GNOME System Monitor. I actually do enjoy the GNOME desktop environment quite a bit. I think it is very nice. It is one of the most complete Linux environments that we have available to us, and the GTK toolkit is very extensive, and everything for the GNOME environment utilizes that. So within this, we do come pre-installed with GNOME boxes. It is a front end to QEMU, or however you want to say that. I don't need to take the tutorial. This is actually what I'm emulating all of these in right now. So that is your quick look at Fedora Linux. Other things you might want to take a look at. The settings menu is very nice. Oh, look, this is wrong settings. So this is the GNOME settings menu. Very simple. We have all of our controls right there available to us. Next, we're going to take a look at number 3 in my list, which is going to be Pop! OS. Pop! OS is one of my favorite Linux distributions as well. As you can see, it has made it into the top 5. Pop! OS is really quite nice because it is based off of Ubuntu, but unlike Ubuntu, it does not come pre-installed with snapbacks. It does use the GNOME desktop environment, however, it is a bit modified when it comes down to it. It is not the traditional GNOME desktop environment. With help if there was an X there. So, this is Pop! OS. Pop! OS also utilizes the GNOME desktop environment that we saw within Fedora Linux. However, I have minimized this one a little bit. This is a little bit more minimal. Let's go ahead and open up a terminal. So first of all, let's do a neofetch. Everyone likes those. And as you can see, a neofetch brings up we are using a little bit less resources than we saw when it came to Fedora. Fedora was using about 1.3 gigabytes. We're down to 1 here. Of course, Arch Linux was only using about 200 megs with that minimal window manager setup that we had. But I digress. Let's do a... When it comes down to Pop! OS, it is based off of Ubuntu, which is based off of Debian, which does not use Pacman. It does not use DNF. Instead, what it does use is APT, or aptitude as I've heard some call it. Anyway, sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade. This is the command you would run to do a full system-wide update in Pop! OS. It's a little bit more verbose than the command that you saw with Fedora Linux. However, a lot of people run Ubuntu-based distributions. I would go as far as to say they are the #1 distribution around. Let's take a look at our file manager. This is the GNOME environment, so this is the Nautilus file manager. Nautilus is very nice in my opinion. It works out well. I do like these icon sets that Pop! OS has. That's very nice. Let's take a look. You can see this is a very minimal setup as well. Let's go ahead and open up a terminal, just so I can show you HTOP. So within HTOP, you can see here 1.8 gigs. So we're using a little bit less resources when compared to our other operating systems that we had shown earlier, minus Arch. There's not really too much to show that's completely different. Let's just, for the sake of completeness here, let's go into our settings and let's go ahead and show you the About page. So as you can see, this is Pop! OS. We're using QEMU, of course. We have 3 gigs of RAM set aside, 2 cores of the CPU, the same resources pretty much. GNOME version 42.4. One key difference that I've noticed, though, is Pop! OS ships with X11 and does not use Wayland out of the box. Now, I'm not sure if your mileage may vary. I believe Pop! OS may have... Let's see. It would appear as if the Wayland front end is not here yet. So that is one difference that I can point out to you right now, is Xorg versus Wayland when it comes to the graphical server. Alright, let's take a look at our next distribution. The next Linux distribution that I would like to say, number 4 out of 5, is openSUSE. It is not SUSE, it is SUSE. If you have seen the musical number, then you know. So I went with the Tumbleweed version. There are 2 distributions, or flavors if you will, of openSUSE. And within those there are 3 desktop environments. So the 2 different flavors you could say would be Tumbleweed and Leap. One is a rolling based distribution, much like Arch Linux or Gentoo. With a rolling distribution, your system is always receiving updates. There are always updates available, and they are much less likely to release a version update. For example, when it comes down to Ubuntu, you see every April, every October, like clockwork, they pump out another release. This is what we would call a stable release distribution. When it comes down to Tumbleweed here, let's do a neofetch. Tumbleweed is a rolling distribution, so you will always have a always have updates available. However, they will not be releasing a new version of Tumbleweed every few months or every year, because it is always updating. So when it comes down to openSUSE, openSUSE uses the Zypper package manager. Zypper is very nice. It's a little bit more verbose than any of the other ones we've actually taken a look at before this. In a lot of ways, Zypper kind of reminds me of a more simplified version of Emerge for Gen 2, because it's just dealing with binaries. Anywho, so we're taking a look at the XFCE version of openSUSE. There are 3 versions, as I stated before. There is the GNOME environment, which we've already taken a look at twice so far. There is the KDE Plasma environment, which is a very traditional Windows-like paradigm, but it is also highly customizable and modifiable, just like anything in Linux, honestly. And last but not least, there is the XFCE4 edition. Within all of these, you're going to find YAST, yet another software control center, or whatever you want to call it. YAST is a program made by openSUSE. This is a really nice bit of software that enables you to graphically install software, graphically update your system, without the need for even opening up the command line. So when it comes down to which Linux distribution I would recommend for a beginner, I would say openSUSE. openSUSE, you could live your entire life in openSUSE without even touching the command line once. And that's not something you could say for a lot of Linux distributions. Let's take a look at some of the other programs here. openSUSE actually comes pre-installed with a lot of software. So, as you can see, we have all of our system settings available here. Within another set of settings, we can take a look at everything from our GTK themes. We can change the appearance. There's Bluetooth color profiles for your display or monitor. We can adjust your XFCE4 desktop icons. Let's go ahead and just go with this traditional XFCE4 background so we know what we're dealing with. There's that mouse we all know and love. I like this one. This one's way different. Oh, that one's nice. Wow. Not a lot of wallpapers installed with openSUSE, honestly. That's a little bit of a letdown. I always like to go through the wallpapers. Anyway, let's take a look. We have the LibreOffice suite installed right out of the box, which is very nice. So you can install openSUSE and pretty much get to work. Pulse audio volume control. We have a media player called Paroli. I've never used that one before. Internet, we do have looks like an instant message client. We have Firefox, an email client. We also have Mozilla Thunderbird, another email client. So we have multiple selections there. There is the XFCE4 web browser as well. Under graphics, we have the GNU image manipulation program. We have image viewer, Shotwell. LibreOffice shows up again in multiple locations. We have the Catfish file search, so if we do that, it should have been hotkeyed to Catfish, but that's okay. There's multiple file searchers as well, by the looks of it. So this is a brief look at openSUSE. openSUSE, like I said, this is honestly one of the best Linux distributions for a beginner to use, as it is incredibly complete and it comes with everything you need right out of the box. It is a little bit bloated and it is an RPM based distribution like Fedora, but that's kind of where the similarities end. As you can see, we're only using 600 megabytes of RAM, which is pretty good. This is very minimal, but you could thank the XFCE4 desktop environment for that just as much as openSUSE. XFCE4 is a lot more minimal than GNOME. So let's go ahead and shut down openSUSE. Last but not least, number 5 out of 5, let's take a look at Ubuntu 22 or 04. This is the LTS stable version. Ubuntu will release 2 versions every year. You will see a stable version every April, 2204. And every October, you will see another version released, which will be 2210, and that should be coming out any day now, if not already out by the time of the releasing of this video. So this is Ubuntu. This is a very popular Linux desktop, if not the most popular. Ubuntu uses the GNOME desktop environment, but it is also quite modified when compared to Fedora. Fedora was pretty much running the stock GNOME straight out of the box, very vanilla if you will call it that. Whereas Ubuntu and Pop! OS have definitely given it their own flair. My first Linux distribution was Ubuntu 7.04, and they have come a very long way since then. The Graphical Software Update Center, there are 2 of them if I recall correctly. So let's go ahead. Oh, well, look at that. We appear to be frozen. Look at that. Sorry, Ubuntu 22.04 is experiencing an internal error. Yeah, let's let Canonical know. I'm sure they'd be happy to know. Let's open up this software center. Ubuntu has something rather unique to it in the Linux world. Alongside the apt package manager, there is also something that we can call snaps. Snaps are akin to Flatpaks or app images. However, they are often frowned upon by the Linux community as they have a non-open source backend. And however, the client that you install on your system is completely open source, Snapd. That is the client right there. However, you need to sign in. You need to sign in to Canonical. You need to create an account. You have to go through all this stuff. It's very Windows-like, and as a result, a lot of the Linux community is not on board with snaps. So this is Ubuntu 22.04. Here we are, the default web browsers, Firefox. We have Thunderbird Mail as well. We have the Nautilus file manager. Rhythmbox is a music player. We have LibreOffice installed as well. If we look at the rest of our applications, you can clearly see that we have the GNOME applications, GNOME Mines. We have GNOME Videos. HTOP, I installed that. Let's go ahead and take a look at HTOP anyway, so we can take a look at our resource utilization. Of course, I am running this update right now, so that's not a very accurate representation of the CPU usage, but as far as memory goes, we can say 1.1 gigabytes sounds pretty fair. So that's not bad. That's actually a little bit more minimal than Fedora. But it's nowhere near XFCE4 with openSUSE or Qtile and Arch Linux. Nothing's going to touch that unless you're in Gen 2. But this is it, really. Of course, there's Vim. I installed that. Ubuntu does not come with Vim, interestingly. So I don't even know how they expect you to just edit your text. What, does everybody use gedit these days, or what? But this is it. So we can go Control-Alt, arrow keys, and we can go through our workspaces just like any other GNOME desktop environment. So let's go ahead and open up our file manager here so we can show you a little bit of GNOME's multitasking. You can open up Firefox on this workspace. Now, I only gave this VM 2 CPU cores and 3 gigs of RAM, so it is a little bit slow, but that's okay. So let's go ahead and go to Workspace 1. Or maybe we want to go back to our file manager. Nope, let's go back to Firefox. We want to get set up here. I'm going to skip this. I'm done with Firefox. So, once again, let's, for the sake of completeness, take a look at our settings. And I'll show you in GNOME the About section. As you can see, we have same set of utilities. We have Wayland is being used in Ubuntu. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Wayland runs very well on some people's hardware, other people's hardware not so much. It depends on what program you want to do. Personally, I've been able to play everything from Quake Champions in Wayland to edit videos in Blender with Wayland. Other people do not report the same level of success, so that is something to keep in mind. However, if you wanted to switch to Xorg, you can always log out, and we can sign in under an Xorg session. It's very simple. You just would hit enter on your user. This little gear will appear in the corner, and we'll switch to Ubuntu on Xorg, and we'll sign into an Xorg session. In this virtual machine, you shouldn't really know this much of a difference. It might be a little bit more or less responsive. We might have been experiencing some compositor errors with Wayland, and that would be why it was running so slow. But Control-Alt-T will open up a terminal. Control, that'll zoom us in. Control plus or Control minus will zoom us out. Control plus, let's zoom in. Let's get a NeoFetch here, going here. Alright, look at that. So, yeah, that was a pretty fair estimate. Just under 1.1 gigs. So, let's go ahead and run htop now. Alright, so, as you can see, it is a little bit more minimal than openSUSE. However, this is the GNOME desktop environment, so it is not as familiar to some people. You could also be running GNOME in openSUSE. What really matters, though, is the back end. So, let's go ahead and open up another tab. Let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit so you can see what we're doing. Let's do a sudo apt update. You know what? Let's take a look at snapd. So when it comes to snaps, the snap command lets you install, configure, refresh, and remove snaps. Snaps are packages that work across many different Linux distributions, enabling secure delivery and operation of the latest apps and utilities. So let's go ahead and do a snap install. What's something we can find in the snap store that isn't terribly big? Let's go with the Chromium web browser. Should be there. So this is the Snap Store. There is of course a graphical front end, but you can access snaps directly from the command line. Snaps will install very quickly, very easily. And the nice thing about snaps is they include all of the dependencies right with them. So sometimes when you install something using apt, it might say that you are missing dependencies and you won't be able to install that until you have all of those dependencies in place. Whereas with snaps, much like Flatpaks, you will not encounter such issues. Let's do another NeoFetch now, and you can see that Ubuntu has 1,735 normal packages, but there's also 10 snaps listed, so very interesting. Ubuntu, you'll notice, also has nice themes. We're using the GNOME terminal, of course. There's really not too much else to show you guys here. Everything else that you've seen pretty much is just standard GNOME stuff. System Monitor, this is the same program you saw in Fedora. As you can see my 2 CPU cores, you can see my random access memory and my swap. You can see my network utilization. I really am quite a fan of GNOME, honestly. It's very complete, very nice. Anyway, that is Ubuntu, the 5th and last of my Linux distributions that I will be showing you guys today.